Hi guys, my name is David Dismanat with Media Unlocked, and today we're going to be working on the third installment of our 6D Mark II walkthrough. We are, of course, starting in the menu systems. We've already gone through the whole outside of the body. We've gone through quite a few of the menu systems in part 1 and 2. So let's go on and start on video 3. Why don't we? So let's turn it on. Let's hit menu. And of course, we're going to start in the yellow rinse settings. So right here is your very first setting is the select folder setting. So you can create different folders. I just always leave it as the Canon folder, and when you reformat it, it goes back to this folder. But you can add subcategory folders or other folders. We'll hit info to go back, or menu to go back. Moving on, file numbering. I have it set to continuous. The other option is auto reset. I believe that it sets at 9,999 as there it goes up to 4 digits, not 5, and it goes back down to 0. So that's what I prefer to do. And then you can do a manual reset whenever you want, as you see. Auto rotate, you are able to pick your auto rotate here or turn that off, and I just leave it on right here. Moving on, the next option is formatting the card. So if you guys want to format your card, most of you probably know what this does. We'll go inside, we can hit OK. You also have a low-level format, and pretty much formatting the card deletes the data table. We'll delete all your images, but if you have not put new information on the card since you formatted it, there is a very good chance you'll be able to recover your photos. So again, let's say you format your card and then you're getting ready to shoot and you realize, oh man, some of those photos didn't transfer over. Well, as long as you haven't started putting new photos on the card and rewriting new data to the card, you can use, I believe SanDisk has their own software that comes with a lot of their thumb drives and stuff that will allow you to go in and try to recover the information. Now, it's not guaranteed, but it usually works. Moving on to wireless communication settings. We are not going to dive into the wireless communication settings, but it's very, how should I put this, guys? But Canon's wireless communication settings with their app that works with your phone or tablet is very primitive. It does not work that great. I have used it. I'm not that impressed with it. We're just not there yet. But you do have that option, and you are able to set up Bluetooth functionality. And so pretty much you can go on your Wi-Fi, you can enable it. It's disabled at the moment, but we could enable it, connect to the local studio Wi-Fi here, and we would be able to transfer, as we're taking pictures, transfer that information over to a tablet or a phone. And it really does not work that well. Canon needs to make a better app. Actually, really none of the professional camera systems out there, their Wi-Fi functionality for this specific task just isn't there yet. So it's not something that I'm going to dive right into because I don't know many people that are using it. Let's move on here to number 2. Auto power off after 1 minute. That's quite simple. Your camera's going to turn off after a minute. LCD brightness. Now, with LCD brightness, I always like to leave it in the middle. If it's too bright, it's going to make your photos look really, really bright when they may not be so. And if it's too dark, it's going to make your photos look too dark when they may not be so. So I find that leaving it at 4 or right in the middle is where you want to with the LCD brightness. LCD off and on button here remains on. You could also set it to the shutter button, and that's when the LCD would come back alive, is by hitting the shutter button. Date and time zone, so we could go in and set the date, time, and the zone. Very simplistic. We got it set to New York time, and it's actually an hour fast right now. It is 9:12, not 10:12. Set your English, set your language, and I said English. Set your language right here. I'm not going to switch that because once I go into another country's language, I may not be able to get back. That could be a little confusing. Anyways, but you do have a plethora of languages that you could read that the information could be displayed in, which is really nice. Viewfinder display, just going to show you how your viewfinder display is set up, and you could go in and set up a grid display and some other options here on your viewfinder. So we'll go back here. We'll move on to section 3. GPS settings. It does have GPS. Again, we're not going to dive right into that, but the GPS settings are going to be really nice. If you wanted to add that GPS metadata into your actual file, that will be added in. One thing the new Nikon D850 that just came out does not have is GPS settings, but you do have that in the 6D Mark II. We'll go back. Video system. Okay, NTSC and PAL. NTSC is what we're going to use here in the Americas, and PAL is what we're going to use everywhere else in the world, like Europe and Asia. So if you're NTSC, you have 24 frames and 60 frames. If you're PAL, you have 30 frames and 50 frames, if I remember correctly. So if you want the 24 and 60 frames, switch it to NTSC if you're outside of the US. Mode guide. So we have this enabled, but pretty much this is going to give you information about your camera as you're doing different stuff in your camera, setting your dial. It's going to give you actual help information to explain stuff to you. You can turn that off. I do not need it, so I could go on and turn it off, but I wanted to leave it on so that you guys could see it as we were doing this review. Featured guide. Again, this is going to give you information on features, and you could go on and disable that if you don't need it. Help text size for all you blind people or people that cannot see stuff small, like Bill, who's very old.
Hey, I represent that remark.
We go standard for an old guy like him. Young guy like myself who sees just fine, we keep it in small. Moving on. Touch control. We have that set to standard. You also have sensitive and disabled. So if you don't want to have the touch, now I no longer can touch the screen. It does not work. For me, I could care less one way or the other because I don't really use it because I think my brain using DSLRs in the past that are Canon just don't use the touch functionality because I've always just used to doing everything with my hands. But I'm sure one day I will get more used to using the touch screen, which one of the nice things with the touch screen is focusing when shooting video. We'll go over that in, I believe, part 4 or 5 in this section. Beep. We can disable it, touch enabled. I've got the beep disabled. Who wants extra noises? Not me.
He's got the beep, he's got the beep, he's got the beep.
Why? I didn't invite you, man. Why are you here?
Leaving now.
Yeah, you should be. Battery info.
At least I held off to give you a cut point there.
Oh, how nice of you, Bill. Moving on, battery info right here. Our battery info is at 68%. The recharge performance is 2 of 3. So when it hits 1 of 3, that means that that battery is really not that good. You may want to go on and throw it out and buy yourself a new battery. And it's got shutter count is 19. Again, go back. Sensor cleaning. If we want to clean our sensor, we can clean it manually and open up the shutter. And we could manually clean it, which I do for Bill and myself from time to time. We do try to get it professionally cleaned once a year if possible. Moving on, button display options. So a lot of electronic level, and we could set up our button display a little bit differently if we wanted to, but I'm very happy with how that's set up. But you do have that option, multi-function lock. So we could lock things in on our multi-function options here. We will leave those as they are. On going to our custom shooting modes. Now, this is where we would set up our custom shooting modes, so C1 and C2. You want to go and set up all the settings that you like. Let's say on C1, you go into here, we pick C1, and then we go on and register those settings like that. So again, I would go on and set up my ISO, aperture, shutter speed, white balance. Go into C1, I would go register settings, pick C1, click OK, and now those settings are going to be registered under C1. Which is, I think, awesome. If you need to clear those settings, you have that option as well. We can go in and clear those settings for C1, and it goes back to nothing set up. Clear all camera settings. Again, we can go and clear all of our camera settings if we wanted to. I'm pretty happy with that. Copyright information. Now, we'll talk about this for a second. I don't put copyright information in my camera, and I probably should. There have been times and this has been in the news, where people have had their camera stolen. People have taken pictures with that camera, then their copyright information or metadata information ends up on the internet. There are a few websites out there that track your metadata information, and when they see that it pops up and know that your camera's stolen, it's a way of tracking or proving that that camera was yours if the previous person that stole it and maybe sold it did not go in and change that information. It's also a way to prove that the photo that you took is your photo. It is hard to go in, and you can do it, but it is hard to go in and actually change metadata information on a picture. And most people that may steal your pictures don't know that there's metadata information, or they're not willing to make the effort to change that metadata information to steal your picture. So going in and filling this information out can be very important. I probably should do it, but I'm too lazy to do it, I guess, because I haven't done it or I'm not worried about it that much. But that is why you would look at adding in your copyright information. Your manual and software, so you can hit this, you can scan this right here and it will pull up your manual and software. If you have, I guess, some form of Wi-Fi or data so that you can pull that off the internet with your phone or iPad or anything that can scan like that. There you go, the certification logo display, just in case you guys wanted to see that. There you go, that's what it looks like. Thank you, Canon. And then, of course, firmware. Now, the firmware information for 6D Mark II, they'll probably come out with something new, I would say within the next year, some kind of firmware update. You will download that firmware information onto a blank card that has been formatted, so it's not completely blank, but a formatted card. And then you'll stick it in your camera, you'll click here, and then this will give you an option. You'll hit OK, and it will go through and add in the new firmware. Very simple to do. So, moving on to the fun stuff, the confusing stuff, is our custom function information. We're going to start off with exposure first, and we're going to walk ourselves through that. So, and let's make sure that we're set to number 1 here. So this is your exposure level increments. So I have this set to 1/3 stops instead of 1/2 stops. So what that means is that you have smaller increments that you jump with your exposure information, therefore allowing you to get a more incremental decision when taking pictures. So I would just go on, if you're watching this, go on and set this to 1/3 stops. This gives you more options when taking photos and setting up your settings in the M mode. Moving on to 2, your ISO speed setting increments. Again, instead of doing full 1/1 stops, which a full 1/1 stop for ISO is 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200, 6400, 12,800. Again, it jumps, it doubles, a 1/1 jump, right? So if we do 1/3 stops, it will be 1/3 of that as it jumps, giving you a better option for picking your ISO settings. Again, go on and just set that to 1/3 stops. Bracketing auto. So I have the bracketing auto set for enabled, so automatic bracketing. So when we go into our bracketing settings and we pick how much we want to bracket out of those 3 stops, and it changes the, mainly it brackets your underexposed, overexposed, and properly exposed. So it will take the information that you've said, this is what I want my exposure to look like, and it will under and overexpose automatically for you when you take those 3 shots. We talked about that in the second video during the menu settings. And so of course I'm going to leave that enabled. Bracketing sequences. So you're able to set your sequence up to 1, 0, 2, 0. I leave this at 0, 0 here. Number of bracketing shots. So I've set this up to 3 bracketed shots. So let's say I wanted to change this to, and we'll go inside, we'll hit the set button. Anytime you want to go and change that setting, just hit the set button, and we want to set to 7 shots. So let's hit menu, and then let's scroll all the way back over to our bracketing. Okay, and here's our bracketing. And so look at this. See how many more we've got now? Woohoo! Again, so now we have 7 options, and it will take 7 bracketed shots instead of 3 bracketed shots. So we'll hit menu. I'm okay with 3. It's really simple to go in and change if you need to. And I can go in and change this anytime I feel the need to. Again, we'll hit set, we'll go in, and we'll go back to 3 shots right here. All right, moving on to the 6th setting. Safety shift. I have this, again, you have a safety shift. I just go on and have that disabled. You have the option to have a safety shift for shutter speed or aperture or ISO speed. Just go on and disable that. Exposure compensation auto cancel. Again, it's another one of those things that we probably want to leave disabled because we don't want to go in and have an auto cancel set up with our exposure compensation. And meter mode AE lock after focus. So we can AE lock with our meter mode. So again, depending on what meter mode we're using, it will go on and AE lock that. And I've just got it set to center weighted value. So we'll hit menu, and we will move on to the autofocus settings. And there is 16 of them, so it's going to take us a little while to get through those.
Hi, this is Bill, and I've stepped in at this point because I know the autofocus systems better than David does because, well, as he correctly pointed out, I have bad eyes, and, well, you know, David, he just decided to walk off because he's a diva, and, well, things like that, you know. Well, so maybe he'll come back and maybe he won't. I'm not sure if I'll let him back in my studio. But in any case, I'm going to be going over the autofocus sections for you. And the reason that these are really both important and something that you really need to explore on your own is because it allows you to customize the autofocus mechanisms to your specific style of shooting. That's the really important part. It allows you to use the camera to make it more or less responsive to particular situations. Now, both the good and bad of it is that, let's say, for example, you're focusing on sports. It allows you to tailor the autofocusing mechanism to the style and the sport that you're shooting. One case, for example, will allow you to track very erratic movements, which is what I use when I photographed the World Championships of bike polo last weekend. But if you're doing something like a car race where you have largely one style of motion, another focusing mechanism will work better for you. This is one where you really have to dive into it yourself. Even the user's guide doesn't talk much about these. They really encourage you to explore it. So let's dive right on into it here to take a look at it. The tracking sensitivity is exactly what the name says. It is how fast the autofocusing mechanism tracks the particular thing that you're following. Now, I don't recommend locked on, because if you're locking on and something dives in front of you, well, I like the ability to move, for example, if I'm shooting, let's say, a relay race when one runner hands the baton to another runner. You can't do that if you're locked on. It doesn't work as well. Moving on, the autofocus acceleration, deceleration. This is what I was talking about, for example, with the bike polo. If you have a subject that is moving very erratically, you hit the set button, and you can change the speed of your autofocus and how it works with that particular type of focus. Moving on, Servo first image priority. Now, first image priority means exactly what it says. When you're shooting in burst mode, what this does is that it gives you a chance to have the camera fire with a priority of getting the shot or focusing first and then getting the shot. If you leave it in the middle, it tries to find a balance between them, which is the default. But if you go over here and you set it to release, that means that the very second you hit the shutter button, it fires. If you set it to focus, it takes the time to finalize its focusing mechanism and then it fires. Now, you can see the pluses and minuses on top of that. If you set it to release, you get that shot. You're more likely to get the shot of the ball on the bat or the golfer hitting the ball, for example. But if you set it to focus, you're more likely to get a clear shot. It's a trade-off, and you have to make a decision which way you want the camera to go. What I do is set it to first image priority, release. Then I go to second image priority and set it to focus. What that means is that in my camera, when I'm shooting sports, the camera fires immediately on that first shutter button push when I'm in burst mode, but then focuses, finalizing the focus, and then fires the rest of the images. I find that for me, that is the best compromise in first versus second shutter or image priority. You could find something different. I really encourage you to experiment with it and figure that out. Okay, moving along. We're going to go into the next menu, which is the AF Assist Beam Firing. This allows you to enable, disable, and your other option is to turn on the infrared assist beam to assist in your autofocus. Now, frankly, I've never explored this one. I don't know how it would respond. I'm a little less likely to use an assist just for that specific reason, since I don't really trust it. So I would always leave this one off and have it disabled. Moving on, lens drive when AF is impossible. Basically, that's when you cannot focus for whatever reason. Maybe your objects are moving too fast, or your lens, for whatever reason, if you've got a macro lens set to close focus and you're trying to use it to shoot at infinity, it won't focus. Basically, this is a menu item which says you either continue to search for focus or you stop after a period of time. You're going to have to make a choice one way or the other. I usually leave it to continue because that's just not a mistake that I make very often. And I think most photographers would fall into that same category. Our next item is autofocus. Select the autofocus area selection. Now this is one where you can select your autofocus points. You can go from a single autofocus point to a small group to a larger group, and you can turn on the different autofocus points or turn them off. Now, it may sound kind of counterproductive to you to turn some of them off, but if you're going to use, for example, your dial wheel or your multifocal button, multifunction button, to cycle between your autofocus points, turning some of them off allows you to cycle between them much more quickly. So that way you can move from a single focus to a group focus or back to single focus with a much more responsive time rate, which allows you to shoot sports, for example, if you're working on one player or a group of players. Now, again, I really encourage you to play with this and to set it up and see what works for you, because one of the great experiments or one of the great tests of how well you know your camera is to turn all the lights off in a room and adjust your camera setting, nothing except feel. That's something I'd make my students do at the end of their classes to see how much they know their camera. And this is just one more way of learning your camera and getting it set up to customize for your particular brand and style of shooting. Moving on, go to the autofocus selection area. You can use either the main dial or the selection button, select between them. Okay, let's move on. The orientation linked AF point. Now this is kind of useful. If you quickly switch or often switch between portrait and landscape orientation in your photography, you can set up, if you choose, which focal point you want the camera to use. Now, a lot of people, of course, turn their center point on because that's the most sensitive, and they will focus on the center point and then recompose. Some people like that, some people don't. But if you are shifting, for example, from a landscape to a portrait orientation, if you have to move your focal point via the joystick, or excuse me, the dial that the 6D has, it's going to take you some time. But if you pre-program a focal point for horizontal and a focal point for vertical, when you switch between portrait and landscape mode holding your camera, what that's going to do is automatically change the focal point for you. It's a lot faster if you spend a lot of time shooting. Now, I try to shoot most of my images in landscape mode, so for me that wouldn't be particularly useful, but for others it would be a very, very useful skill. So it is something that you should explore. So, moving on. The initial autofocus point versus the servo, I really recommend you leave that to auto. Okay, your camera is going to be able to react a lot faster than you can for anything involving that change. So frankly, leave it to auto and just pretend that that menu item doesn't exist. Moving on, the auto AF point selection color tracking, enable versus disable. One of the things that the autofocus uses when it's in the autofocus or servo mode is to track color, because cameras are very sensitive to that, of course. If you leave it enabled, it allows the sensitivity of the camera to be a little bit faster in the way things work. I always recommend leaving that one enabled. Moving on, the AF point selection movement. Your camera has an autofocus area that's got an edge to it. If you leave this at 0 where it stops at the autofocus area edges, your autofocus stops to focus when you hit the edge. If you move it over to continuous, it's going to continually try to operate, but it won't be able to. So it's going to gum up the works, so to speak. I really recommend you leave this one at the stops at the edges. The AF point display during focus, that's where what you're doing is having the display that you're seeing through the viewfinder lit when it is continually operating. I really recommend that. Otherwise, well, you really may not know when you have focus and when you don't. The VF display illumination, auto allows that red light to stay on. You really need to have that lit. I would not recommend changing that to disable, not by any stretch of the imagination. And the last one, the AF micro adjustment, I would leave that to disable because it can, again, slow down your focusing. And unless you're working on like macro photography, for example, that's not something you want to need. On a macro, you might be willing to explore it, but I just leave mine disabled because it doesn't make that much of an improvement. So basically, they were back to number 1 now, and that's taking you through the entire custom function menu.
Let's move on to our custom function 3. This is our last of the custom functions. I've jumped back over as Bill walked us through all the autofocus settings. Thank you very much, Bill. And now let's do operations and others. So this is actually pretty simple, and let's just go on and start in 1. Warnings in viewfinder. So these are some warnings that will pop up, just to let you know. Moving on to 2. Dial direction during TV and AV. You can reverse direction if you need to. I just leave it at normal. Why would I reverse it, as it's always just been set to normal all those years I've been using all the different Canon cameras. Restart lens on power off. Again, yes, I have that enabled. Again, these lenses have, that's how you're able to do your aperture and everything. There's little micro connections with the body, and the lenses do have a motor in them. So yes, I go on and restart them, just in case they get stuck in something if they don't automatically restart properly. And then the very last one is your custom controls, and you can go in and change all of these. The main custom control that I go in and change, and I'm gonna hit set, is instead of having this set to autofocus on for my shutter, I want that, I set it over here to evaluated metering, and then I can go in here and set up our back button focus right here. So I go in here, and it's set to autofocus on my back button on the little tiny star back here. So I can go in and customize these as needed, and I could go through here and customize a bunch of those if I want to. We'll hit menu again, and then we'll go to clear all custom functions if we want to. We do not, because I've got those set up exactly how I want them. And then we'll move on to our last little setting here, and you can go in and configure different settings to be on this list. The only one I really use is white balance, so I can go directly into white balance, and then, you know, the old, and maybe the Rebels still do this, but they used to have the white balance button here. They don't really have one here, so what I do is I go into menu and click white balance, and then I can go in and play around with my white balance really quick here. So this is like a quick menu in a manner of speaking, but I can go in and configure, and I can add in other items that I want to add to this quick menu right here. And that really concludes part 3 of our menu system. So in part 4, we're gonna go over the video functions. That'll be a pretty short video. There's a lot to go over, but yeah, we'll go over our actual video functions, and we'll be done going through the whole entire camera. And guess what, guys? You don't need that manual anymore. You just need this video to reference whenever you have a question. So, as always, we'll catch you next time. Well, if you guys have made it this far, one thing I should mention is there is a little card button. If you scroll back a little bit, you can hit the little card button, and it will pop out and will show all 4 videos. So if you wanted to watch 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on which video you're on, then you can go watch that video. Thanks for stopping in and making it this far, though. Over here to the right will be our newest video, which might be one of these videos themselves at the time. Down here diagonally, we are going to put a link to the 6D Mark II that will send you over to B&H. If you are interested in purchasing it, it does give us a little commission. And as always, guys, come on, you made it this far. This has been quite helpful. Go on and hit that subscribe button. It helps us out. And as always, guys, we'll catch you next time.